Here's a segment from a recent Gun Talk radio episode. You can listen to all the Gun Talk radio podcasts however you tune in, or check out guntalk.com for more. Hey, we're back with you. Tom Gresham. It is 866-TALK-GUN for the number here. Show's called Gun Talk because we talk about guns, every aspect of it. And I know, sometimes people say, well, God, you're talking about the legal side of stuff so much these days. I know, I've never done that before. But we're in a different world now. I mean, we're in a completely different place now because the battle traditionally for gun rights in the Second Amendment has been in the legislatures, in the state houses. And with some fights in the courts, but they've been hard to win. But then we had Heller, and then, of course, we had McDonald, and then last year we had Bruen. And this post-Bruen world we are in now is different. It's just different. We have maybe you call it a different measuring stick, if you will, on what's legal and what is constitutional. And who better to talk about that than what the guy I think is, frankly, America's leading scholar on the Second Amendment joins us right now, Stephen Hallbrook. Steve, thank you so much for spending some time with us.
Always my pleasure, Tom. Good to talk to you.
Okay, so you got this, we'll talk about Bruen in a bit, but you got this book you wrote. And I just found it very interesting because I think of you as a guy who writes these very intricate, deep treatises about the Second Amendment and history and everything else. And then I see you got a book about the AR-15. I'm going, what is that? And the title of it is America's Rifle, the case for the AR-15. What's the idea behind that?
Well, it's not a technical manual, but it's an attempt to bring together our history and tradition of firearm ownership generally and to apply it to America's rifle. The AR-15 and similar types have been considered, or they're the best-selling rifle in America today. Let's put it that way. Right. You can't go to a shooting range unless you're in one of the bad states. You will see AR-15 type rifles. And it's very denigrated, and there are bans on it. When I wrote the book, it was 6 states. And a week after the Bruen decision, the state of Delaware thought that, I guess they didn't get the Bruen memo. The governor signed a ban. And then most recently, the governor of Illinois signed a ban, and it's being hotly contested right now.
Right.
But the idea, I figured, look, for one thing, judges don't understand guns. Lawyers don't understand guns. They don't teach that in law school. So This book has not only the usual constitutional arguments, it's got a diagram from the Colt H. Barr Sporter user manual, showing the gun parts. Hey, this is the barrel. This is the stock. Here's the pistol grip.
Right.
What I found litigating these cases for so long, judges don't know doodly squat about these guns, and so they keep, if they want to uphold the ban, they say the term assault weapon every other sentence. Let's just keep using that derogatory term, and maybe we'll find a way to convince people that it's constitutional to ban them. But they never talk about the features because they don't know anything about the features. And when they do say something, it just parrots the stupid propaganda like the purpose of the pistol grip is to fire as many rounds from the hip as possible to shoot as many people as possible. I mean, how ridiculous can you get? So I try to do...
They say it over and over again to the point where it becomes accepted. And it's almost like a throwaway line is that, we all know the reason for the pistol grip is so you can just spray everybody and kill as many people as possible. And then they just move on like that's just a given.
Yeah, there was the Heller case. And then I litigated what's called the Heller 2 case. That's in the D.C. Circuit. That was the first post-Heller case to uphold a so-called assault weapon ban. And we end up with a 2-to-1 decision where all the evidence in the case was the purpose of the pistol grip is because it's a straight line design. You reduce muzzle rise when you fire it, so your shots are more accurate. Your second shot can be more accurate. And there was nothing in the record about all this shooting from the hip stuff, except from a Brady Center lobbyist, and the court latched onto that. I mean, you don't do that in normal cases in court, where all the proof goes one way and somebody just asserts something, and then the court upholds a law on that basis. But luckily, we had a dissenting opinion by a guy named Brett Kavanaugh.
How about that?
Who would ever guess? He later got on the Supreme Court. He would have overturned the D.C. ban.
Right.
And so, what I did after I litigated the case, we didn't prevail. So I did what some lawyers do. I wrote a law review article about why we should have won, and then kind of moved on. And then lo and behold, this nomination for Mr. Kavanaugh comes up, and the whole world has changed now, though. I mean, just like you said in your opening, Bruen has changed things, and the lower courts who don't really like guns or the Second Amendment, they're going to have some explaining to
do. I like that. So, all right, so Stephen, in this post-Bruen world, we have a lot of lawsuits that have been filed. The idea, of course, is because a lot of the lower courts are still ignoring it. They're treating Bruen like they did Heller, which is, yeah, we know that's what they said, but we think it's still really important that we control guns no matter what the law actually is. So we're going to do what we want to do. So at some point, some of these have to end up going back to the Supreme Court, I'm thinking, with the court turning around and saying, look, we've told you twice about this. We really mean it. Am I imagining this? Is this hopeful or wishful thinking?
Yeah, after Heller and McDonald, you have the Colby case in the Fourth Circuit. Maryland's ban gets upheld, and the court just made stuff up and said there's no real difference between a machine gun and a semi-auto, things like that. And so there was a case after that the Supreme Court held on to on the same issue. And after Bruen came down, the Supreme Court took that case and they sent it back to the Fourth Circuit and said, redecide this case in light of our decision in Bruen. And they had oral argument in that case already. And tomorrow, all these New York restrictions on carrying that New York passed in defiance of Bruen, that's going to be argued in the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Second Circuit tomorrow.
Yeah, we got 5 cases going before the court tomorrow. You
got it. Bans on carrying in churches and subways, and the idea that if you go into any property that's not your own, unless they have a sign out saying gun owners welcome, it's a felony. I mean, imagine that. You go into a store.
Unfortunately, we did not draw a great panel in the Second Circuit with this, and we'll see what happens. But of course, all of these are just kind of steps toward ending up at the Supreme Court, it seems like to me. I mean, and you're the guy. I mean, you've argued cases before the Supreme Court. Is that where we're heading, is going back again?
That it looks that way, and that's why I wrote this book. A year ago, Bruen was being litigated and not decided yet, and the carry issue was the main issue at that point. And I just figured, what's going to come next is this so-called assault weapon BS. And so I wrote this book, America's Rifle, the case for the AR-15, with the hope that people litigating cases and the public and the courts might find it useful, might find some of the information useful. I started litigating this issue in 1989 when it started. That was California's Roberti Ruiz law. That was the first rifle ban in American history. Before that, handguns were bad and long guns were good. Remember that? Remember those days?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, but Saturday Night Special, those were bad, but you could have any rifle you wanted, right?
Yeah. And even in the Heller case about D.C. handgun ban, you had D.C. and handgun control, those groups arguing, well, long guns are better for self-defense. And so now they say long guns are no good for self-defense. You have to have a handgun.
Well, I've always said, look, they will just go after whichever one they think they can get at the time. They're after all of them, but if they can take a slice at a time, whichever one they can demonize and make sound scary and bad to the public, they will go after. And then, of course, the whole idea is let's legitimize the idea that there are bad guns and good guns, and then we can keep adding guns to the list of the bad guns.
Right, instead of focusing on people. That's where the problem is. We all know that most of the crimes are committed by the same recidivists. I'm talking serious crime. If you don't get them off the street, if you have progressive prosecutors and they think that carjacking is not a serious offense, please, that's where the focus needs to be. And traditionally it was.
Yep. Hey, Stephen, hold on a second. I'm going to take a quick break here. I want to direct people to your website, Stephen Halbrook. It's StephenHalbrook, StephenHalbrook.com. Stephen has some of the very best books on the Second Amendment, every aspect of it. If you are a student of this, if you want to be smarter about it, I would just say start building up your library, and you couldn't do better than to get books written by Stephen Halbrook. We'll talk to him when we come back on the backside. All right, back with you here. Tom Gresham. It's Gun Talk. If you want to join us, it's 866-TALK-GUN. We're talking with Stephen Halbrook, a noted Second Amendment scholar and attorney. Stephen, in the world of lawyers and law schools, it seems to me that 20, 30 years ago, the Second Amendment was being taught as an anachronism and really almost a dead letter. Is that changing? Are lawyers understanding the Second Amendment any better these days?
Well, yeah, it had to change. I mean, I was in law school in the 70s, and you could take constitutional law. It would not be mentioned, maybe in a footnote. It wouldn't be discussed in class. There was no student organizations where you could discuss these things. Like today, we have the Federalist Society, and I speak at law schools on their behalf frequently. And so they can't ignore the fact that the Supreme Court decided Heller, McDonald, and now Bruin. And so, yeah, I mean, it's discussed. The legal academy, the law professors, I would suspect the majority are anti-Second Amendment, but certainly there are others who teach it objectively. And so things have changed, that's for sure. There's a number of law students studying on how to defeat the Second Amendment, and so we've got there's the groups that the law firms who have always done pro bono work, for the anti-gun cause, some of the most prestigious law firms, and there's Bloomberg money is there in the law schools. There are like Duke University Law School has a center for the study of the Second Amendment, and it's primarily anti-Second Amendment. So
it's a Bloomberg funded part of Duke University where they're basically saying you guys do all the research you can to try to destroy the Second Amendment.
Right, and you've got so-called public health at Johns Hopkins University in Maryland. So there's a lot of money there promoting the other side, but certainly you've got a lot of students are pro-Second Amendment. And you've got, like I said, the Federalist Society. And then you have things like at Stanford University recently. So that one of the things they threw at that judge was that they didn't like something he must have said about guns. I don't know what it was, but, you can I've never encountered that. I've spoken at Yale and had no problem with anybody. And then what happened at Stanford was just, it was a shame. I mean, these people, they want to be lawyers. They're crazy.
Yeah, they're shouting down a sitting judge on the Fifth Circuit on the U.S. Court of Appeals, won't let him speak. And then somehow, I mean, they basically flunked second grade civics. They think that's a First Amendment issue. Said, no, this is not a First Amendment issue, because if you don't understand it's about the government shutting down free speech, you really don't need to be a lawyer, and you're in Stanford Law School, for heaven's sakes.
Right. I mean, look, what's going on is this pendulum going back and forth. It's a struggle. All of history is a struggle between freedom and slavery in one form or another. And we can see it in every aspect of our society on our issue. as well as other issues. And look, it's gotten a lot better, I have to say, since I was in law school. And the law schools are better. We've got good court decisions now. We didn't have those before. And I think we're going to get some more good decisions.
Well, that leads me to the final question, which is, if you crystal ball this thing for me, we have Bruen. Of course, in my head, I'm thinking, well, Bruen should be able to wipe out every gun control law. I know it won't do that, but what do we get eventually? If you look down 5 or 10 years, what's the landscape for the Second Amendment and gun laws look like?
Well, I mean, in the courts, it's never going to be perfect, but I'll tell you what, where the people have spoken has been in the states. And at the political level, for example, we've got more than half the states are constitutional carry. We've only got 8 states where there's bans on semi-auto rifles. And if you look at those states like Illinois, you've got more than 90% of the county sheriffs saying they're not going to enforce that law. So there's a big rebellion going on. People vote with their feet as well as at the ballot box, and they vote with their money. They buy more guns than they ever have in American history. So I'm optimistic. I think things are going well, where there's going to be some ups and downs. There's going to be defeats, but I think the population at large is pro-Second Amendment.
Well, I am encouraged because you have a long-term view and a much more educated view on this than I do, and I'm really glad to hear that. I mean, I think that Bruen is going to be a wonderful tool, but it is going to be a battle. I mean, the very idea that there are states passing what they're calling Bruen response laws, basically the Supreme Court said this, so we're going to pass a law that says the opposite of what the Supreme Court just said. That's bizarre.
They always do that. When Heller was decided, the District of Columbia officials went out on the steps of the Supreme Court, and basically they said, we're really going to get revenge against gun owners now. This is a terrible decision, and we're going to work around it. And that's what the governor of New York said after Bruen. That's what the California authorities said. And they've taken every step they can to try to negate it. So it's like massive resistance against the Supreme Court. And there are some judges who are going to try every trick in the book to try to negate it. And unfortunately, it's going to be up to the Supreme Court to try to fix it. And they cannot fix everything. So we'll see where this goes.
Right. And, of course, long term, the Supreme Court in 10 years will not be made up the same way it is today. And so, we may say it's a very favorable court now, but in 10 years, who knows?
That's right. And so that's why it's so important for Americans to know their rights. And that's why the Bill of Rights was adopted. There was a Virginia jurist, St. George Tucker, who wrote the first commentaries on the Constitution. And he said that's the purpose of the Bill of Rights, so that regular people can read what's stated there and know what to do to protect their rights. It's not written as a guidebook for the government and to try to see what it can get away with. The ultimate purpose of the Bill of Rights, and obviously including the Second Amendment, is for people to know what their rights are, and it clearly states what it states. And all those years when these hotty-toddy people were arguing to the real smart people that, this doesn't mean that people have a right to keep and bear arms. That's a collective militia right. Nobody has this right. And boy, were they proven wrong. And anybody who ever took them serious, it was delusional to start with.
Right. I mean, I sat there in the courtroom at the the court down in New Orleans. I'm trying to think of it right now, where the government lawyer said, yes, thank you. The government lawyer said, yes. The judge says, are you saying that no one has a right to own a gun in America? He said, that's correct. There is no right to own a gun in America. This is the U.S. Justice Department attorney. He says, no one has a right to own a gun in America. He said, well, you mean except for people in the National Guard? And the lawyer says, no, even people in the National Guard don't have a right to own a gun unless it's issued to them. Hey, Stephen, I have run out of time, and I apologize for that. We're going to have to do this again another time, and I'm going to recommend that people grab one or more of your books because they are all excellent.
Thank you, Tom. Always good to talk to you, man.
You bet. Always fun to have you here. The most recent book is America's Rifle, The Case for the AR-15 by Stephen Halbrook, Halbrook, Ph.D., attorney at law, smart guy, constitutional scholar. I learn things every time I read his work, and they're easy to read. They're not like legal, books that are hard to read. You'll like it. America's Rifle, The Case for the AR-15. Do you have an AR-15? Call me now, 866-TALK-GUN.